My name is Amaka Ose, and I want to ask you something right at the beginning. Have you ever worked somewhere for so long, given so much, learned everything about that place, the systems, the clients, the secrets, the gaps that nobody else could fill, and then one day realized that all of that knowledge, all of that loyalty, all of those years had been used to build a trap that was designed specifically for you? Have you ever trained the person who replaced you without knowing that was what you were doing? Because I have. And what I am going to tell you today is exactly how it happened, what it cost me, and what God did about it when I had nothing left to do myself. My name is Amaka Ose, and I spent 10 years at Meridian Solutions. If you work in financial services in Lagos, you know the name. Mid-size firm, good reputation, the kind of company that is not the biggest in the room, but is consistent and reliable and has been around long enough that people trust it. I joined when I was 26, fresh from a master's degree that I had paid for myself with 3 years of savings and a part-time job that I do not miss. I started as a junior analyst. By year 3, I was senior. By year 5, I was managing a portfolio of clients that represented almost a quarter of the firm's revenue. By year 7, I was the person that new clients asked for by name, not by the firm's name, by my name, Amaka. They called and said, "I want to work with Amaka." I say this not to impress you. I say it because the size of what I had built matters to the story of what was taken. You cannot understand the taking without understanding what was there to take. My direct manager was a man named Mr. Danladi. He had been at the firm for 15 years when I arrived, and he had the particular authority of someone who has been in one place long enough that his habits have become institutional. He was not brilliant. I say that plainly because it is true, and because pretending otherwise would not honor what happened. He was competent and political and very good at managing upward, at making sure the people above him saw what he wanted them to see. He recognized early that I was useful to him, and I, 26 years old, grateful for the opportunity, raised to respect authority and work hard and trust that results would speak for themselves, I was useful to him in every way he needed without ever asking what I was getting in return. That is the first mistake. And I want to tell you this clearly so that if you are 26 and working somewhere and being useful to someone, you hear me. Know what you are building and for whom. Results speak for themselves only when there is someone with authority listening. Make sure that person is not the same person who benefits from keeping you unheard. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a workplace where you just knew, that your contributions were being presented upward as someone else's ideas? Where you would solve a problem and then hear your solution described in a meeting by a person who had not been in the room when you solved it? Where your name was somehow never in the sentence? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to know how many of us there are. The thing with Mr. Danladi was subtle enough that I could always explain it away. When I tried to name it, it sounded like paranoia. The quarterly report where my analysis was central, but my name appeared only in the acknowledgements. Well, the format was always like that. The client dinner where he described my work as our approach. Well, we were a team. The promotion that did not come at year 4 when my portfolio metrics were the strongest in the department. Well, the firm was restructuring. I explained away 5 years of it. 5 years of my most productive work presented upward in ways that kept me essential but invisible. Present enough to be indispensable, invisible enough to be controllable. And then in year 8, Mr. Danladi came to me with a request that I now understand completely and that I understood not at all at the time. He said, "Amaka, we are bringing in a new analyst. Young, strong academic background, needs mentoring. I would like you to take her under your wing. Train her properly, the way you do things." I said, "Of course." Of course. 2 words. The same 2 words that cost Nkechi 7 years. It seems this is the phrase that opens the most expensive doors. Her name was Simi. She was 24. sharp, eager, with the particular hunger of someone who had been told her whole life that she was exceptional and was now in a room trying to prove it. I liked her immediately. She reminded me of myself at that age. The energy, the questions, the way she stayed late, not because she had to, but because she wanted to understand things properly. I taught her everything. I want you to understand what that means, not the surface things, everything. My client management approach, built over 10 years of learning exactly what each client needed before they knew they needed it. My risk assessment framework, which I had developed quietly over 3 years because the firm's standard one had gaps that nobody else had noticed. My relationship with every major client, the context behind each account, the history, the sensitivities, the specific language that each person responded to, the informal networks inside the firm, who to approach for what, how to navigate the politics without becoming part of them. I taught her all of it, generously, completely, because that is who I am, and because Mr. Danladi had asked me to, and because I genuinely believed, that building someone up cost me nothing. I was wrong about the last part. I found out the way you find out things in offices, sideways, accidentally, through a conversation that was not meant for you. I was in the kitchen on a Thursday afternoon making tea when 2 people from the HR department came in and did not see me at the far counter. They were talking about the restructuring, the word that had been circulating for weeks in the particular way that important words circulate in offices, present everywhere and acknowledged nowhere. One of them said, Danladi's department is being streamlined. 1 senior, not 2. The other said, so who stays? The first one said, Simi. She's being positioned for the senior role. Danladi has been making the case for her for months apparently, said she's the future of the department. I stood at that counter with my tea going cold in my hand. The second person said, what about Amaka? The first one said, redundancy package. They are calling it a restructuring exit. Very clean apparently, very generous. They left. I stood there for a long time. I thought about 10 years, about the client who had called and asked for me by name, about the risk assessment framework that I had built and that now lived in the firm's systems without my name on it, about Simi, who I had taught everything to, who had my knowledge and my methods and my client relationships and was 24 years old and had been here for 18 months. I thought about Mr. Danladi, who had asked me to train her, who had watched me do it, who had been making the case for her for months while I was sitting in my office building his department's future without knowing I was building my own exit. I want to stop here and ask you, and I need you to be honest with me in the comments. What would you have done in that moment? Would you have walked into his office and confronted him? Would you have gone to HR immediately? Would you have started looking for another job in silence? Or would you have done what I did? Stood at a kitchen counter with cold tea, feeling the full weight of 10 years, and then gone back to your desk and worked until 5 o'clock because you did not yet know what else to do? Tell me. Because I have judged myself for what I did next, and I am still not sure the judgment is fair.
What I did was go back to my desk. I finished my work for the day. I went home. I did not sleep well. And in the morning, I went back to the office and I worked again because that is what I knew how to do and because falling apart at my desk was not something I was willing to give anyone the satisfaction of witnessing. But something had shifted. The shift was internal and invisible, and it changed everything. I stopped giving away the things that were mine. Not dramatically, not with a confrontation or a speech. I simply began to notice, for the first time clearly, without the comfortable explanations, exactly what was mine and what was being taken. The ideas I had that I started writing down with dates and my name on them before sharing. The client relationships I began to document in detail in my personal records, not just the firm's systems. The informal conversations I had been having for years that I started following up with emails so there was a record of who said what to whom. I did this quietly. I told no one, and at the same time, I began to make calls. Not desperate calls, not the calls of someone who is panicking, careful calls to people I had worked with over 10 years who knew what I could do. I was methodical. I was patient. I was, for the first time in 10 years, working entirely for myself. The official conversation happened 6 weeks after the kitchen. Mr. Danladi called me into his office on a Tuesday morning with the particular solemnity of a man who has rehearsed what he is about to say and is hoping it goes smoothly. He said, "Amaka, as you may have heard, the firm is going through a restructuring period." I said, "Yes, I have heard." He said, "We have made some difficult decisions about the shape of the department going forward." I said nothing. I let him say it. He said, "Your contribution to this firm over 10 years has been extraordinary. We want to honor that with a generous exit package. We hope you will see this as an opportunity." I looked at him, this man who had stood in the conference room for 10 years and presented my work as our approach, this man who had asked me to train my replacement and watched me do it generously and completely, this man who had been making the case for Simi for months while I was in my office building the department he was now handing to her. I said, "Thank you for telling me directly. I will review the package with my lawyer." He seemed slightly surprised. I think he had expected more from me, more emotion, more protest, more of the gratitude that I had been trained by years of experience to perform. I was done performing. I said, "I also want to note formally that the risk assessment framework currently in the firm's systems was developed entirely by me over a period of 3 years. My lawyer will be in touch about the appropriate attribution and any licensing considerations." The surprise on his face in that moment was worth something. Not everything, but something. I stood up. I said, "I will have the desk cleared by Friday," and I left his office. Now I want to ask you something that I think about often. At what point does loyalty become self-destruction? At what point does working hard for someone else stop being virtue and start being a choice that you are making, consciously or not, to delay your own life? I am not saying loyalty is wrong. I am saying that loyalty without discernment is expensive, and the price is paid by you, not by the person you are loyal to. Tell me in the comments where you think that line is, because I spent 10 years on the wrong side of it, and I'm still working out where it should have been. What happened after I left Meridian Solutions, I will tell you in the way it actually happened, not as a triumphant story where everything comes together immediately, because that is not how it happened, and I think the honest version is more useful to you than the triumphant one. The first 3 months were hard, harder than I had expected, even though I had been preparing. I had savings, I had contacts, I had the documentation of 10 years of work, but I also had the particular disorientation of someone who has been inside one structure for a long time and has just stepped outside it. The days had a shapelessness that I was not used to, the absence of the routine I had built and hated and relied on simultaneously. I felt that absence more than I expected to. 2 of the clients I had managed at Meridian reached out within the first month. They had heard I had left. They asked if I was available to work with them independently. I said yes. I said it with a steadiness I had to work to maintain, because the truth was that those 2 clients and the revenue they represented were the difference between a plan that worked and one that did not. They came with me, and then they told others. By the end of the first year, I had 7 clients. By the end of the second year, I had a proper firm, registered, staffed with 2 junior analysts whom I paid fairly and whose names I put on the work they did because I knew what it felt like when that did not happen. The risk assessment framework that I had flagged to Mr. Danladi's face, my lawyer sent a formal letter to Meridian Solutions within 2 weeks of my departure. The outcome of that communication I will not describe in full detail because some things remain confidential. What I will tell you is that it was resolved in a way that acknowledged my authorship, and the financial component of that resolution was on its own more than my annual salary had been at Meridian. God is not always theatrical. Sometimes he's just precise. I heard about Mr. Denlady last year from someone who was still at the firm. He'd been passed over for a directorship that he had been working toward for years. The person who got it, apparently, was someone he had not expected and could not have predicted, someone who had been watching from a distance for a long time. I did not celebrate. I noted it, and then I went back to my work. Because here's what I have learned in the years since the kitchen and the cold tea and the Tuesday morning office conversation. The people who take from you, who use your work and your knowledge and your loyalty and your years, they are not your problem to solve. They are their own problem. What they plant, they will eventually stand in. You do not need to water it. You do not need to tend it. You just need to get yourself out of the field before the harvest comes. Get yourself out of the field. Build somewhere else. Build with your own name on it. Build with the knowledge that everything you give freely to someone who is keeping count against you is a gift you are taking from your own future. Simi called me once, about a year after I left. She said she had heard what happened with the framework letter, and she wanted to say she had not known. She said it clearly and without excuse. I did not know what he was doing. I did not know you were being set up. I want you to know that. I believed her. I do not think Simi was part of a plan. I think she was, like me at 26, someone who was working hard and being used by someone who knew how to use hard-working people. She was not my enemy. She was another person in a situation that neither of us had designed. I said, I know, and I mean it. Build something that belongs to you. Don't spend the best years of your ability making someone else indispensable. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Is that what I'm doing? I said, I don't know. Only you can see that from where you were standing. But pay attention. That is all I'm saying. Pay attention. My name is Amaka Osei. I spent 10 years building someone else's department, and then I spent 3 years building my own firm. And the firm I built in 3 years with my own name on it and my own methods in it and my own clients choosing to be there is worth more to me than everything those 10 years produced. Not because the 10 years were wasted. They were not. Everything I learned I brought with me. Every client relationship I had built honestly, I brought with me. Every skill I had developed, I brought with me. What I left behind was the obligation to be invisible, the habit of explaining away what was being done to me, the idea that working hard in the right direction would eventually be enough without me also ensuring that the right people could see who was doing the work. God saw who was doing the work. He always sees, and he does not need a presentation or a quarterly report or a manager's endorsement to know what is true. He just needs you to be ready when he opens the door. I was ready, and the door he opened was so much larger than the door that was closed in my face that I no longer think about the closing. I only think about what came after.